Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Roll 2 DMs, episode 8.
Yeah.
Um, I was absent last week. How did last week go?
So it went fun. It went nice. It was fun talking to Brendan live.
Live.
I used to talk to Brendan like not live, so like it's nice.
Heck yeah.
It's a pretty fun. Yeah, like we managed to cover a decent amount about like combat and stuff. We might have to revisit combat way after, but I felt like it was better to switch it up
Cool. Yeah.
because I get bored of talking about combat weeks on weeks.
Believe me,
You know,
I do. As someone who doesn't.
As someone who doesn't run combat, like I would get drained just talking about combat.
For sure. But yeah, we're back, episode 8. This week we are talking about. Also, quick shout out to Brendan. Thank you so much for filling in.
Yes.
Hopefully we might have him return for a couple episodes and maybe rotate some other people in. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate Brendan filling in. But today, magic items.
Magic items.
This is something that was requested. So thanks again to whoever requested this.
Yes.
As per usual, we will remind you every week we put out a poll on the Discord to ask you what you guys want to hear about for the topic, as well as specific questions within that topic. So
And the poll should be the poll should also be attached to the bio on our Twitch account actually.
Perfect.
So you can even access it as long as you have a CU email. You can just access it.
So yeah, today we're talking magic items. Magic items are definitely what I believe to be a pretty integral part of the
Yes.
D&D experience. I feel like there are a couple really iconic items that a lot of people know, love, and recognize.
Black Razor, Vorpal swords.
The classics.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely something that can add a lot of flavor, add a lot of variety, and just a lot of, I guess, just different dynamic within your game. It can change a lot. It can be part of the story. It does a lot. Magic items go a really long way for D&D campaigns.
They do really add like a lot to the general experience. And back in the day that was the way that you got rewarded, really.
Right.
Like other than gold, it was magic items. Because like regular items could only carry you so far in a world where there's people that can breathe fire.
Yeah.
Exactly. And just like it just look at you a bit and like you're dead. Sorry.
Yeah, and you always see it like if you're looking at like the OG, like the Dungeon Master's Guide, you're looking at the loot tables. You're always seeing magic items up near that top, and you're seeing, just select random magic item from the table. So definitely adds a lot of power to your players.
Yes.
So we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll also talk about some of the inherent risks of introducing magic items into the game.
Homebrewing items. That's gonna be the biggest one, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess we'll start off with the first kind of major topic that we wanted to cover, which was Solomon. When you have either a grouping of magic items or a grouping of things that you want to see in the game that are magical in nature, how and when do you like giving these items to players in your campaign?
Honestly, it's very much depends on I guess now in like our tier of play of like my party is kind of going in. Well, I'm running 2 games and one of them is like level 2s and the other one's level 7, so there's like general like contrast in that regard. And with like level 7 and such, you do feel like a general like need to I would even call it need, honestly, to provide your players with magic items at that tier of play, just because lots of monsters they're going to be dealing with, lots of like things they're going to be encountering are going to have inherent resistance against non-magical piercing, bludgeoning, and slashing.
Right.
And that's the generally like how you can physically harm someone. Either you punch, you slash, or you poke.
A lot of higher level monsters do have that like resistance introduced, which makes it like, especially if you have like a full party of players where none of them have any sort of magic, like reducing that, it can be an interesting factor to show them power scaling, but also at the same time it can definitely make a party feel a lot weaker. And so as you progress in higher levels, it's almost like a given that the party's going to have something to counter that, right?
Yeah, no, most assuredly. And personally, for me, how I provide, giving them the items, I usually tend to provide those items in the form of, actually, it's almost always like it's different for each time they find something, because sometimes the party can find they can fight something that could logically and most reasonably use a magic item, and they find it, and they kill the person and they get the item,
Right.
or they manage to like steal it from someone, or get it through a heist, or through acquiring some loot while traveling,
Right.
after solving a puzzle and such, or sometimes you just buy them.
Right.
And like I that is a general topic on its own of like the availability of magic items.
Exactly.
Really, I remember we talked about that yesterday.
Yeah. So I was gonna like bring that up. Is so we'll kind of talk about. We'll finish talking about when,
Oh,
but
yes,
that'll
yeah.
come up. I like to introduce magic items. Kind of like with what I've mentioned with a lot of my campaigns
Yeah.
and a lot of my notes. Almost all of my items are story driven in some way. A lot of them. There are times when I'm not sure how to give an item to a player that'll be like very story relevant.
Yeah.
And those are the points where I might just straight up ask like, hey,
Yeah.
you're like, if I have a couple of party members that don't have magic items, like, hey, if you were to run into a merchant that had every item under the sun, what would you be interested in receiving?
Sometimes, yeah, that's the way. Just putting something that the players want,
Right.
like your fighter, throw that plate mail there.
Yeah.
Throw that mithril like chain like mail there.
Right,
like
because
yeah.
because like you homebrew items doesn't mean that every magic item you put into your game is homebrew.
Yeah.
That's something that we'll also talk about. But just like
Yes.
as a small note, yeah. So for me, it depends a lot on where they are in the story. Usually I'll give them magic items. Almost like when you level up. Sometimes I put them in between like a level up, so I don't think that I want to level up the party quite yet.
Oh,
but I
yeah.
want to give them a bit of a power boost, something like a mid arc thing where they find it and then they use it to finish the arc.
I feel like it's fairly reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I like to see is kind of in the middle of storylines, because obviously at the end they might have the expectation of having a magic item, so I kind of like mixing it up and putting them in the middle sometimes, in the middle of like a story beat or a story arc. Because then they know that either that item will be important if it's homebrewed and very story relevant,
Yeah.
or just a nice like boost, like, hey, this like you're progressing through this well. Here's an extra little boost because it's gonna get harder.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, sometimes they're also like the easiest thing of, you sleep and you find it under your pillow. Just have it be mysterious and have the players, because sometimes, like you can just give the players the mystery without ever having to solve and like really like, like you just find this somehow. Yeah.
Swords now.
Yeah, yeah, you lose a couple of teeth from that like fight, like the bars like fight, and you got all those teeth you lost. Well, congrats, you have some brass knuckles.
Fantastic. Easy.
But yeah, I feel like in regards of also like how there's always the opportunity to just have them give them the opportunity to, or give them a person that can make the magic items for them. Have a crafter, have someone do them based on commission and based on your requirements, because that really is a really good way of introducing homebrewed items, or items that are that the players commission for their own needs instead of you guessing. Because sometimes it's really nice, just the players want something really, they can just be straight in game or out of game, be like, yo, I really want something that can give me extra armor above this thing, or I really want something that's imbued with this spell.
Right.
Can we work with this? And like then you can instead of having to negotiate out of character, which kind of breaks immersion to a degree, you can negotiate in character and be like, oh, the dwarf, oh well, if you want some spells, you might have to pay a bit extra, or you have to go on this little side quest to get this item.
Right.
You gotta get yeah. And sometimes those side quests can be like fun, and like you can make a quest just for a certain item, and lots of times or sometimes the easiest thing, give the players a problem, and then give them the solution or hint at the solution in the way of a merchant peddling their wares and being like, oh yes, I'm selling silvered weapons, and if you want to spend some extra money, I have this particular flamestung that's like works quite well against vampires, and like that can be a really easy way of doing it, honestly.
I really like the specialist concept. I actually that's not something I had done before, but that's actually a really interesting idea to just have like, especially for early levels, the thing that you mentioned was silvered, but I guess it extends beyond. But that would be really interesting, just having a guy that's like, like I have contracts with silver mines, I know how to silver weapons, that is what I do. You're not going to find a bag of holding in my cart, but I can silver any weapon for you, right?
Yeah, like he has a shit ton of silvered powder, various forms of silver. He can make darts. He can make brass knuckles there, like brass knuckles there instead, like silver knuckles, I guess. And all that stuff, and it could work out to be a very interesting merchant also, in the way of why is this person selling only silvered weapons?
Right.
You know, that kind of it's kind of weird, you know, because like it's expensive.
Yeah.
So like maybe you can add that extra stuff in terms of like how you can add like more, you know, like life and world, you know, like I guess story to the world via the merchants that sell these items.
One of my favorite things to do is go on tangents for.
Yeah.
This goes specifically onto magic items. Like I like the idea. This happens in a lot of video games. Is the forger quest?
Oh yes, yes, I love
like,
those.
There's a lot most
Finally
games
my-
have like the
yeah.
master forger, right? And
Yeah.
you start with like low level forgers that can't.
You
do
remember
that
like
much.
the Witcher Wild Hunt? Like there was
Exactly.
like you gotta find the smithing tools from the Master Smith
Right.
to get the like
Master
Griffin
Smith,
armor.
That's
Yeah.
what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like that. I think that's a cool
It's really
opportunity
fun.
for a side
Yeah.
quest, as well. But yeah, just in general, I think that I definitely prefer when I don't. We've talked about this a little bit, but I don't like the idea of magic shops.
Yeah.
And the idea in my the reason why is because, for one, I don't generally oversaturate my games with magic.
Fair.
I like magic to stay kind of wondrous.
Yes. No, that's
So-
fairly fair. Like maintaining that kind of rareness and
Mhm.
like wonder to magic. Yeah.
Yeah.
The magicness of magic. You know?
Right,
Yeah.
because sometimes if you walk into a bar and like every Joe like
Has
whatever bloke is just there can have like some magic, like there's nothing wrong with that, of course. But for me personally, I like magic to stay, I guess magical
yeah,
wonders.
yeah. That's totally fair. Like I approach it. I remember like I mentioned it like yesterday to an amount, but like how I personally do it is kind of view the world in the way that magic items are extremely useful to the average person, especially even common magic items like having an alchemy jug. As a person, like as a barkeeper, being able to produce an infinite amount of beer or mayonnaise, even
Right.
like if you are like have a banquet or something where you have just you really need a bunch of like egg salads.
Right.
Like there's like magic items do provide very like effective and fairly useful ways of solving modern day issues in a world that's fairly medieval and like setting and vibe.
Right.
Especially if you're doing in a world where like it's generally like high fantasy and stuff. In that regard, you're gonna have people who are gonna have extreme needs for an ever lighting, like an always on lantern, or having something that like, or for instance a cleansing stone that casts precipitation on you to clean yourself.
Right.
There's lots of these things that like it's really useful to just generally have like something like, and also just make it interesting based on that.
Yeah.
Just have like small the Artificers Guild is specialized in mass producing those useful items, but keep your like combat base and items that can kill people in a separate kind of tier away from your useful items that people can have.
That's a really good way to put it. So I guess like I'll mention mine with a caveat because like I think you're right. This is kind of the thing that I almost compare it to is less a magic shop and more of like a trinket shop.
Yeah.
Because like you're totally right. There's some like low level items where like like you could basically like commercialize like stones of sending or whatever, right? Like you could have like very common magic items and they're called common for a reason, right? So that's what I reserve for like I guess like trinket shops and that's like where I might have magic items.
For sure, yeah.
I guess the idea that I'm more against, and Nampi puts up an interesting example of Kobe the teleporting magic shop. It always comes with the stipulation that the person that owns it has to be like a level 28 caster.
Yes.
That's just like unkillable.
They're like an illithid, or they're like an actual beholder.
Yeah.
Who like just like is like just a random normal guy that's totally normal. His name is Norman maybe, and he just has a general goods store.
Right.
But yeah, you buy in there and you have Vorpal aspect toothpicks.
Yeah.
Or like some like whack ass stuff.
What I like in magic shops is, and this is one way that I actually introduce magic items that it's probably my favorite way to do it is if I talk to a player and I say, hey, is there a magic item you're particularly interested in? And then they tell me, and then like a session or two down the line, they find a trinket shop. And he just happens to have like a collection in the back, right?
Yeah.
Where he's got like 3 or 4 magic
I got
items.
some stuff in the back.
Yeah,
I gotta
exactly. That's my favorite way to do it. It's like, oh, you guys are looking for like when they walk in and he tells her like a weird raggedy bunch and they're not looking for a stone of sending or like a basic like they're looking for for like Vorpal Sword Plus, right?
Yeah.
And so then the
The
guy's like,
special reserve,
I've
you know?
got something
Yeah.
in the back. Keep it quiet. Don't tell anyone about this. That kind of thing. Whereas like I guess like the concept that I'm not as like open to for my campaigns personally is the idea of like that magic shop where there's just like the strongest armor, like bags of holding in different
Adamantine. Yeah,
colors,
yeah,
like
literally, yeah.
up on the wall, like
You've got like 5 handy haversacks, 5 bags of holding, like 6 adamantine full plate like armors just laying around, and like like armor stands, and you have like 6 vorpals hung on like above each one, and like, bro, how is this guy alive?
yeah, exactly. Like how is
Yeah.
this one shopkeep not just getting absolutely
Because he's like a level
railed by
20
a bunch of-
fighter who like he's like Durham from like the like Waterdeep,
yeah,
like the barkeep, where he's
yeah.
just like a super
fucking
OP. Yeah.
indestructible.
Yeah.
Because like that's what you would need to have, right? Like you would need to have someone that's so strong
Yeah.
that they can have like thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of worth of magic items just
Yeah.
in a little like shop. I like the teleporting shop idea. That's cool. So yeah, in terms of like how I introduce them, it's usually story element, but
Organically, he's trying.
yeah, exactly, as organically as possible. Make it feel like the item was already in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty important to
That
me.
is a really big thing, because you also don't want the players to feel like you made this, like this item exists only for them. That's a thing that lots of DMs are against, and like I have fairly mixed feelings about. Yeah, like it's, oh yeah, like Numpy says, like ancient brass dragon in disguise, like something like that, where like they just But I generally like to keep the idea that items and stuff, like players aren't the only people using these things. Like there is an industry there. Like I do entertain the idea of there being an industry for it,
Right.
but it being fairly for a very specialized and certain tier of people
Right.
in the world that are living in a high risk, high reward, very high income, lots of expendable
like a
income.
magical city,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, like a magical city, or just like adventuring groups,
Right.
where like you know for a fact there are going to be people going through this area who are going to have lots of money and might die in a week if they don't have enough goods or enough like magic items.
Right.
And that industry is one that I feel like is the way how I view it personally, is that you have these highly skilled like craftsmen who are specialized. This guy's really good at enchanting stuff. He can get you almost anything enchanted, and you just gotta really tell him what you need.
Right.
And like sure, he has a bunch of like general purpose stuff. He might have some like swords of generally like silvered weapons.
Right.
They're fairly common. And like I remember in my game there was like after this like blood moon event where like there's like a vampire spawns running amok and stuff. Like the guy himself was like, okay, like it would make sense that he would prep ahead of time to sell magic stakes.
Right.
He would just sell like weighted stakes. I call them like tactical stakes because they had like foregrips on them to like help with leverage and stuff.
Gotcha.
So like yeah, and it makes sense. You would because think in the way that how you as a businessman would work your business.
Right. No, it makes
But
sense. And yeah, like I think it makes sense too. Like this might be getting into the weeds a little bit, but like having like an industry of magic for sure makes sense because like you're gonna have at least in a lot of games, in a lot of my games, in a lot of games that I've seen, there are like usually in the world a couple of cities that are like this city has a lot of mages. Magic can be rarer out in the outskirts, but
Spell
in this
books,
city in particular,
yeah.
and there can be a lot of reasons for it. Either there's like an academy, or like this is where like the conclave of wizards meets every fortnight, whatever.
Yeah.
There can be a lot of reasons for it, but yeah, you can have that concentration where there's like a lot of magic shops that sell trinkets, and then they just like export those trinkets off to like little shops off, like a mom and pop shop that's like, yeah, we have 5 sending stones, we got them in last week.
Yeah,
from
no, exactly.
whatever
Yeah.
city that's
Or we
magical.
have like stopwatches and like clocks and stuff. You can imagine those as being similar to that uncommon thing of it gives you what is effectively a feat in which it's a compass and a clock. You get keen mind, but like in your pocket watch.
Right.
And like that's the thing that lots of people, especially when you're like doing stuff that is time sensitive, having a stopwatch or just like a pocket watch on you is extremely useful, but also expensive to make in that kind of like fantasy world.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I had a question. You might know this, but is there a magic item that keeps track of time, like of like what you would call Earth time? And this is again official. You can always homebrew this, but like something that keeps track of Earth time even when you switch to different planes.
Oh,
Is
you
there
mean
an
like
official
like
item like that?
like a stopwatch, like a clock?
But I imagine like when time gets warped, does the clock still work the same?
Well, it's if it's made of like gears and stuff, and it's like ticking along. There's no magical attachment to it. That's how I do it personally.
Mm.
I'm not sure whether there might be. I feel like I'm pretty sure there is an item that does indicate time, and there are a bunch of cantrips. I know the Druidcraft cantrip gives you the ability to know when it's sun setting, sun rising, and that stuff.
Gotcha.
But I'm not sure whether there is an actual item that gives you Earth time. I might make that. There is now in my world right now. There is an item that I just made up.
Or maybe
yeah.
like a 3D globe.
Yeah, no, like
which
yeah.
always shows you the direction of
Oh,
the
like
other
time zones
globe.
also.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be very fun actually. But yeah, no, I'm certainly putting that in my world right now. Thanks for the idea.
Yeah. So I guess we can roll into
Yeah.
like the next
Homebrewing,
thing,
yeah.
'cause it's relevant here. Is homebrewing magic items. I will be honest, I do this very seldom, and that's just because I'm particularly worried about my power scaling, just because I so there's like two reasons for
Numpy
this.
does say there is an orb of time from Xanathar's, but it only works on the material plane. Makes sense.
Okay,
Makes
gotcha.
sense. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Nampi.
Yeah.
So I did want to like, I guess, stress as a caveat. My games, and I don't know if this is unique or not. But I don't like using currency that much. It sounds like ridiculous, right? But like,
I remember we talked about this before, but like I think out of stream.
Yeah. Because like very few times do I like putting players in situations where their like one aim and motivation is just to make money. Yeah. Because in my head I have dude. Like way more powerful than cash. But like I have a weird time visualizing how much money they should have for how strong an item I'm gonna give them. Yeah. Like internally balancing that is weird for me, and that's where I think
for sure. Yeah.
Homebrew items play a very unique role. Because especially for homebrew items, I have a hard time like deciding how strong they really are. So in terms of homebrew items, I'll take a step back because that was kind of a very specific example. But when you're sitting down to homebrew an item, what really brings you to decide I want to homebrew an item, and how do you like go about like formulating it?
I guess the biggest question is when I really do recommend, like for people who are like interested in making homebrew items and stuff, ask yourself first, is there an item in like 5e that's official that has the same purpose or use that I want? Right. Is there something that fulfills the same purpose or use or utility or requirement that I need from this item that exists currently in the like I guess source books and wherever in the general books of D&D 5e. Right. And and also another question is there something that partially fulfills that purpose? That's another big thing that I think of. And once you answer those two questions and the answer is no and maybe, that's when you usually make a magic item. When you have something that you have a magic item that you want, or you have an item that essentially you have an item that you want your players to have, or your players need this item, or you need this item for a big bad in something, and you know that there is an item that does a similar job but not quite the thing that you want, right, or does a part of its use. That's usually when I see that this might be a good time to make an item where I essentially butcher the magic item that exists and graft that into what I want. Just because I personally hold a belief, I'm not a good writer, and I'm not really that good of a person. I'm not paid to like run D&D. Right. It's not really my job, or it's not my livelihood to really like make magic items or create this type of content. Sure. I want to trust myself with the same level of trust I would put in the writers in Wizards of the Coast, and generally like writers who produce content as per their job, and as per they have the creds,
principal
hobby,
yeah,
exactly. They've been running this thing a lot longer than me, and I trust them in that regard. Yeah. So I very much do believe that the mechanics and the stuff and the benefits that they have are generally seen as being better, and perhaps have more I guess kind of like tightly knotted or tightly knit in regards of it not having that much loopholes.
Yeah, no, I agree. So like the thing is, when I homebrew things, my first plan of attack usually, because I like things to tie into my story, is I'll sometimes just reflavor text certain swords. or like certain
Yeah,
weapons
exactly.
or certain
Yeah.
items. So like any +1 magic sword can be the sword of insert name of whatever, and it can be
Exactly.
relative to your game, right?
No, for sure. Yeah.
What I do generally when I'm homebrewing items is I definitely do more of the like take something that's already there and tack onto it approach.
Yes.
I will sometimes change, like the elemental damage. That's one of the one of the major things I
That's
do.
a pretty useful one.
Because
I
it's like
agree.
a very small thing that generally isn't game
Yeah.
breaking. You can definitely make someone a lot stronger by making it like forced, like
Yeah,
like
exactly. That's
making
what I
like the
mentioned.
rarer,
Yeah.
the rarer
The top 10
types
damage
for sure.
types, you gotta make that list. Yeah.
Yeah,
I saw that
exactly.
you read it a while ago. That was
But that's like a cool way to like do it. Like if I know the item I'm
Yeah.
giving him is a little weak, tweak it so that either it gives it an element aspect that is very applicable to what they're about to fight, or make it a really strong inherent damage type.
True.
Same thing with like making items that have saves and then changing the saves
Yes.
to make it something like intelligence, which rarely do.
It's
do,
a lot
like,
more. It's a
things
lot more
have
hard hitting.
saves
Really.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's generally my plan of attack. I think in terms of raw homebrewing, weirdly enough, my raw homebrewing almost like for items almost generally goes to very strong NPCs.
Fair
And
enough.
that's
Yeah.
because I don't have to worry about it being game breaking because my
Yes.
NPCs can be as
You
game breaking
control
as I
your
want.
NPCs. Yeah.
Exactly. They can be as
That's a
strong
big
or
thing,
as
yeah.
weak as I want them to be. And if it turns out that the NPC dies, or, like I can make it so that the NPC, like if I've worked with the weapon enough that my NPC has used it, I'm like, this would be sick, and now my players are high enough level to use this, and it doesn't seem to have busted the game
You might
every
die
time
or
the
give
NPC.
it to them.
Yeah, then I'll either have the NPC gifted down or have the NPC die or something like that.
That is pretty fair. Yeah.
Because that way I can kind of like play test it.
Yeah.
And either I'm like, oh, this character's so fucking strong, this is never going in my game, or like it comes in and gives it an interesting dynamic. I'm like, damn, that would be really interesting to give to this player. He has a very close relationship with this
True.
NPC. So yeah, I almost like play test my own material with my NPCs, just because it's less detrimental in my opinion than either A, giving my players way too strong of items and then making my combat completely meaningless, which I don't like doing,
Yes.
or giving my enemies too strong of homebrew items and just clapping my players, which also
Yeah.
doesn't sound like too much fun. I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of fun for me just doing like damage die, but at the
Yeah.
same time, like that's not why I run the game. right?
Rolling 3d10 damage on one attack for a
Right.
thing with 3 attacks is kind of mean.
Yeah. No,
It
yeah.
gets a bit busted.
So yeah, I actually definitely, now looking back, I homebrew a lot more for my NPCs.
Yes.
And most of the homebrew that I give to my players is very much reflavored things that already exist and
That
are
is
kind
fair.
of like damage balanced.
That is fair. How I personally, I just remembered, I was thinking, like while you were speaking, I was like, thinking about all the items that I've made and stuff. Majority of them have just been really reskinned homebrew items that I found from other people who make homebrew. Most
Oh,
times.
gotcha.
Where like I did go on a very large binge of just going on. I think like it's I don't really recommend it personally, but like just going on like Unearth Arcana, like the subreddit, not the actual UA like official UA thing,
Right.
and just going through and finding cool ideas and stealing them. Sometimes you end up with busted stuff. Other times you end up with underwhelming stuff, and it takes a lot of time. And I personally I would recommend going through it and trying to judge and see for yourself whether something is busted or fair or needs a bit more power.
Right.
Just because that really does give you a general good sense, and especially looking at other people and seeing the discussion in regard to that creation can give you some insight sometimes.
Yep.
Although it is a very risky business, just because everyone runs a different game.
Right.
But for me, lots of times when I was thinking like a couple of items, there's one in particular that came to mind. That was an item that I gave a player for a reason, and then I realized it was so useful to them for a totally other reason.
Right.
Where I remember, I think it was I can't remember. I think it was like a homebrew like compilation thing that was all like stuff relating to like Assassin's Creed, and like it had a full like list of like hidden blade attachments and stuff, and they had this bottom text thing where they had the special item which was the mask from Dishonored.
Oh.
The mask, except they relabeled it to the Mask of the Corvus. because like it does look like a crow.
Classic.
Yeah, and it gave a bunch of stuff. It gave a bunch of benefits, and I was like, okay, a couple of these things could be useful to one of my players who's technically a fugitive, and is also like maybe who would benefit from having this way of obscuring his identity.
Right.
I mainly just kind of reflavored and reskinned it to be like essentially cutting off a bunch of the OP stuff that thing had, and just made it be that you have advantage on investigation and perception checks when investigating really close, essentially worked as a magnifying glass and also a spy glass. So you had advantage on inspecting really fine and intricate stuff as well as very far away stuff.
Gotcha.
And it was any that benefit as well as it masked your voice, and it was generally it was a mask, so that's the other thing that was useful. And the thing is that I initially thought that I thought he was just mainly going to use the identity thing because he was like him and a bunch of other players wanted to do a heist and stuff, so this was going to be useful to you,
right?
But the most time he used it was when the character later spec'd out to be a tinkerer and crafter and was doing fine circuitry with robots. And he was mainly using that investigation checks to very finely examine these robots and stuff, and it gave him an edge that I was like, damn, this is really useful to him now. Yeah. And that's the thing with lots of items is you never know when they're gonna when the item's gonna have this true power spike,
right?
Because sometimes it's you it's a good item, but then you realize at a certain point, wow, this is a really good item for this particular situation,
right?
And that's the thing that you really have to take into account, especially when homebrewing, which is or introducing items that have unorthodox benefits.
Right.
Is you just you have to be aware of there may be unforeseen side effects. Really.
Yeah. No. Honestly, and that's why is there? I guess it would have been interesting to have either someone call in or someone in the chat tell us, because we don't just from scratch design.
Yes.
Magic items.
I've done a couple of them.
Right.
I've done one or two, but it's tough.
Yeah.
It's time consuming.
Far and few between.
Yeah.
But yeah, because one of the things that you mentioned that I think is really important is there are very specific reasons, I'm sure, why the designers of D&D didn't put in certain effects.
Yes.
And there's even Twitter pages and subreddits of the wording of magic items.
Oh yeah, Sage's advice, in general,
because it's really important. The way that they worded it is very purposeful.
Particular,
there's very few times where the official content magic items step over their own toes.
Yes.
And make a mistake where the wording can be ambiguous. A lot of the times it is very specifically worded and driven so that it can either be cross-referenced with other rules or is internally consistent with what it's saying. Yes. And when you introduce, a completely unique effect that you design, and a lot of times people will design this off of, a video game character or
exactly.
a movie or whatever, which is totally cool. And I definitely encourage people to try it and do it.
It's fun.
But the thing to be most careful of, I think, is the wording for sure. Make sure that
yes.
And this is why it becomes difficult, right? Because you can only in your head come up with so many scenarios where you might use the item, and then you can start introducing I know bags of holding, for example, and anything that works with
what was it,
dimensional
the portable
pockets,
hole,
the portable hole too.
And bag of holding,
it can make things so complicated.
Shout out to the DM duels,
And there's a very good chance that your item, again, for simpler things like a sword that does a certain amount of damage, blah blah blah, that's cool.
It's fairly straightforward in that regard. It's damage dice.
But when you start doing very weird, tricky things,
introducing a new mechanic is how I see it. Really,
it can conflict with a lot of things that have been very purposefully written and designed, and it is. There's nothing wrong with it, but it is absolutely imperative that you as a DM are prepared to answer questions either from your players or from other DMs if you ask for advice on an item. And that's another thing too. That's another good way to do it. And this is something that I appreciate about the Boulder D&D Discord is I've seen a couple people put in designs for
shout out to Kobe.
Yeah, shout out to Kobe. Shout out to everyone else too. I know Brendan has put stuff in there.
Yes, the subclasses and stuff. That's a whole different homebrew.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a kind of forms of subclasses.
But I've seen a lot of for ideas abound. I've seen a lot of items.
Really
and
cool
ideas.
Of
people hopping in and critiquing. Hearing other people's thoughts, I think, is really important with homebrewing items because it's very easy to get caught with an idea and then not realizing it's either super weak or super busted. usually leans on the super busted side.
Most likely, it's fair. The only time that it becomes super weak is when you over adjust for thinking it's busted.
Right.
When in reality, it's underwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
That is a situation that may occur at times. Like personally, how I agree. Yeah, fully. Yeah.
And homebrewing items, the ones that I've done from scratch, I definitely feel have leaned on the underwhelming side for me personally, and that's just a result of me again not. I don't do a lot of combat, but when I do combat, I like for there to be like interesting moments.
Yes.
Not like, like it's always cool to get a crit in a critical spot, right? But I don't like my special moments in combat depending on the die rolls.
Fair.
I like setting up scenarios where the magic items are gonna serve like a very specific purpose that in the moment is going to seem really cool.
Yeah.
So like one thing that was kind of underwhelming in concept, but ended up coming in really clutch is I gave one of my players a blade that was a learning blade.
Okay.
And so it picked up aspects based on the like fighting style of who picked it up.
Okay.
So because the paladin had like a defending style.
Yeah.
I forget what protection. Yeah. So the sword could actually basically gained like a parry ability for an ally.
Oh, that's nice.
So if
That's
an
actually
ally
re-
was
that's an
within
interesting
5
idea, yeah.
feet, you could essentially do like a small shield. So I think if I remember correctly, if an ally is within
10 feet.
within melee range of your weapon,
That's a good.
and they're attacked with a either a non-magical projectile or a weapon, you could use your protection style to actually add +2.
Yeah.
So again, like it's nothing crazy, right? It's a very basic reaction. It's not adding a ton of AC, but it was really cool in the moment because it did come up. There was a player that was downed, and I had totally forgotten about the item, but the person was like, he wasn't down, he was prone, so he was at disadvantage, or he was getting attacked at advantage. And the second die roll that was like the one that took advantage.
Yeah.
With the +2 didn't hit.
Oh.
Which was like super cool, right?
Clutch, yeah. That
and
was
it wasn't
clutch,
like they
yeah.
were dying or anything. Like they weren't in risk of dying.
It was a cool moment though.
Yeah, exactly. Like they just got knocked prone. Like they're probably gonna get hit with a ton of damage. There's a good chance for a crit.
Yeah.
And then it was a hard hitting attack that got parried off with the +2.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, that's
so
good.
like in concept, +2 isn't like it's nothing insane, and like I think for the level they were at, it was underwhelming, but it was just like a little bit of like an added thing onto the homebrew item.
Yeah.
That made for an interesting moment once, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And like you just need that one moment.
Mm-hmm.
You just need that one moment where, the player can essentially can do the thing that the DM didn't really expect them to do.
Right.
At that moment to me, like where the DM himself is like, damn, that worked.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like because sometimes like the moments that surprise everyone are the most fun moments where sometimes it just happens. You know. I remember one thing I did want to mention because of homebrewing is I just realized I was thinking back and I just realized one big thing. Majority of the things I've homebrewed don't really have stat sheets or item sheets.
Yeah.
There's stuff that the players never really used and exists in the world to add for their, like environment and stuff, The players, they like the world I have has like flying ships and stuff.
Right.
Has, these weird magical combustion engines and like explosives and stuff. I never stab like a single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I never, and those things technically are magic items. However, they aren't really something that is official,
Right.
nor is it something that I've really, statted out. And, that's a big thing in terms of homebrewing is that people always view it and, you have to make an item sheet for it and stuff. But sometimes, especially if you're like an improv DM or, you don't, you can work with that stuff. You just need the general idea and concept. And really, whatever you run that's outside of the norm is technically homebrew, you know? Or it's your own writing to an effect.
Yeah. The extent of my homebrew is honestly kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
I rarely create like a stat sheet where I just tell them, "Oh, it's a +1 flame tongue."
Yeah.
But note I've used that phrase a little bit too much, but it's like note the name and description. I think I have like the Soulsborne symptom where like
you have the item descriptions where like is the left bone of the saint has been forged into this blade.
No,
its spirit holds within it.
I
It can smite any vampire on sight.
I love doing that. Not just because like the homebrew in it doesn't come from what the item does. it's how it gets used in the world. So like if they're in a like right, if I gave them the name
Yeah.
of the sword or something, and then they're like in a hall of heroes or something, and they find the tombstone that matches the name.
Yeah.
Obviously, the person with the sword's
Like,
gonna be like,
whoa.
"This is my moment. This is where my sword
Yeah.
comes into play." Not in a combat scenario,
Yeah.
but in literally like either
Exactly.
you know, insert whatever encounter I decided for when they
Yeah.
if they figured that out, or like they focus on the sword in front of the grave and the fucking tombstone opens and there's treasure
Exactly.
or whatever.
No, straight
Something
up.
simple like that.
A funny moment that happens with me is kind of the opposite in the way that the party was going in and they were going into the tombs of this like church. Essentially, it's usually like the Bloodborne like crypts, where like you know it had like all the tomb like spooky stuff
Like the
and stuff.
chalice dungeon.
The chalice, yeah. Well, it was a lot shorter than that. Thankfully, I wouldn't really want to run in a dungeon crawl like that. No traps. But the thing is that they were going to this place, and you know, along the way, one of the party members was like, "I would like to look through and see if there's any like you know they encountered this armory that was ransacked. It had you know like a bunch of reliquaries and like essentially like you know the stuff that the soldiers and like you know essentially Templars were buried with. They weren't like they separated the bodies and the earthly possessions you know in separate places.
Gotcha.
So the treasury got you know like essentially ransacked, and then when the party member was like, I'd like to roll investigation to you know look for any magic items that are around here, and I was like sure yeah, and that was the player with had the advantage on investigation, so they found a flame stung. They found a flame stunk kind of like in the rubble of essentially these people like dug a hole into the treasury, and in the rubble of that hole that they dug out was this flame stunk they kind of pulled out and stuff, and you know it's like oh fuck it's a flame stunk, I'm level 4, this shouldn't you know this is like pretty useful for me,
Right.
you know. I think they rolled like I think above a 20 by decent like either natural 20 or like some weird some like wow I was like okay you deserve something for this. This is a good point.
Yeah.
And after that I think it was like 3 sessions ago or 4 sessions ago. Like I think that was about 2 weeks or 3 weeks away from. Sorry, I mean at least 6 sessions separating these two events, where then the players go into this go into that same church, and they have like a church workshop. It's really just Bloodborne,
Right.
and they were like you know, and then
Got
this
full Bloodborne.
yeah, and then you know this the workshop attendee is like wait, that sword is from the Bleeding Rock Chapel. How do you have like how did you get that sword? You're not a worshiper. You don't even believe in you know like our faith. Like how did you get that sword? You know?
Right.
And then the player was like and then you know like luckily it was a whole moment with like another NPC who like covered their asses, and was like oh yeah no like he's provided the sword by providence, and he's you know like he found you know like all that stuff. And it creates those moments, you know,
Yeah.
where it gives the players that feeling of wait, this isn't just a flame stung. This sword is belonged to this person who was, you know, like, this flame stung was specifically designed to fight werewolves and like vampires in the way that its fire did the same thing that radiant damage does,
Right.
where it stops regeneration and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, like you give those cool moments, you know.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I guess now we can roll onto our last topic,
Yeah.
which will probably be a little bit brief since we've covered it here and there.
Yes.
But we've already talked about how busted they can be,
Yes.
how weak they can be. How do you balance around magic items, and specifically when you introduce a magic item into a campaign? You know, you vetted it. It might either be something homebrewed or something that you found that's a source book. How do you go about balancing your game around the introduction of that magic item or multiple magic items in your party? Is there anything that you do different?
For me, usually I just throw harder enemies. I usually just adjust the difficulty and like, personally for I do, because I do have a habit of giving a lot of items.
Mm-hmm.
I am one of those DMs that are like, this thing looks too cool to not give you, honestly. You know,
Right.
like I kind of live vicariously through my like, you know, like through my players in the way that, oh yes, you get those items, get those kills, you know. And like sometimes it gets to the degree where like I was like, damn, this person's doing 3d8 damage. This person has you know like 3d6 force damage. I was like, oh my, this is not good. And then I'm like, oh, but the thing is, I can make the combat encounters.
Right.
I can, because the majority, especially in regards of, you know, bustedness that usually happens, it's most times happens in combat, you know, in situations where the party is fighting, and, you know, that's where the damage dice and the sheer numbers and math and utility just go above. and become go far above where they would be in terms of that difficulty if they didn't have those items. And lots of times the way that like how I remedy this is just have enemies and have monsters and have whatever they're fighting or encountering, just be able to adjust for that difficulty level and acknowledge you as a DM when designing that encounter that these people are not just average level 4s or like level 5s. These are level 5s or like in my case level 7s with items that like shouldn't really have.
Right.
With like high damage dice, and it gives you that kind of comfort. For me, comfort where I can throw tough stuff at them without worrying, because like I'm like, oh wait, throwing like 3 vampire spawn on this mounted guy with like that flies around and stuff. Should I be worried about this? No, because one person has a grappling hook, the other person can fly. A bunch of people have guns. Like they're not gonna be facing two. Like sure, it's gonna be a tough fight, but I can introduce mechanics at an earlier level, with like a lot more comfort, I guess.
Yeah.
And that kind of taps into like last week's episode about like where we talked about tiers of play, where like lots of times you can bridge the gap between like you can have a level 7 party but throw a level 10 encounter at them because they're like they're decked out items,
match the that's a good way to put it, definitely. One of the big reasons why I like putting it mid arc is because sometimes I generally put in my items with a purpose.
Yes.
I will test set a purpose with a smaller encounter. And then I'll see like, oh shit, they're racking up like 30% more damage than I was expecting them. So as they're moving through the encounter, I'm over here like hot like just as an example.
I was like, wait, I wouldn't. I wish I did that.
It's more like just like seeing like if I put an enemy, I'm like, this should last like 3 or 4 turns, and if they clap it in one because of the new magic item, I'm like, the boss I designed is probably a little too weak if it has anything to do with the damage numbers that I was expecting and what I'm seeing here. So then I'll take like hot balance notes. So like in the small encounter, if I was expecting it last 3-4 turns and they killed it in one, I'm like, well, that's gonna shave off like, again, to use like numbers, like that's gonna shave off 30% of the cool encounter. I don't necessarily want that. Maybe I'll toss in a resistance here, or maybe I'll like add a little bit of health.
Be sneaky and be like, oh, he has regen now.
Yeah. So the way that I balance it is generally by putting in a less important encounter, or I guess like a less pivotal encounter. Because again, that is fair. I don't love tossing in encounters for the sake of encounters. But I do sometimes prep an encounter specifically for when I introduce, and this doesn't just come with magic items. This sometimes also comes with level up, so I can see what the party's going to do with their level up.
That is fair,
So those are kind of like the big points where I put in combat.
Like damage tests, general number tests.
Exactly.
That they add, they serve multiple. I guess they're multi-purpose because they're minor encounters to get the players to get a better feel of their new level or their new item, as well as you to get a similar feel on how well they do and how much damage they can output. Yeah. Really.
And kind of going back to like kind of like going back to just the fact that a lot of the stuff that we design oftentimes takes after video games.
Yes. Yes. That is a habit we both do.
I was gonna mention that a lot of the times I'll also introduce new enemy types around level ups. Because then I know what, like, if my big bad is like a beefier version of these little ones, I can watch how the interaction of either the magic item or the level up interacts with my new enemy type. If it's like very synergistic in a bad way, where my magic item literally just hard counters the enemy type so hard that it's making the combat kind of useless. I'll usually adjust the enemy type, and I'll either maybe not make him as weak to whatever effect the party just gained. Maybe crank up the save if someone just got because like one of my least favorite things is like when people get banishment. And like their whole strategy revolves around getting a banishment off. Maybe I'm like,
which is a valid strategy.
Banishment, so I might do one of two things here. I'll either,
nitpick about the item that they're banishing with.
I'll either give them I'll give the enemy one legendary save.
My god!
Just to like tack it off, just give it one where normally I wouldn't have given it any. Or I'm going to increase the save of that specific one just a tad to give myself a better chance of not having my encounter end off of a level 4
That is
spell.
fair. That is fair.
So same thing with magic items too. Like if I know that, for example, they have like what's a good example? Like if I know they have like a flame tongue, and I gave it purposefully because it's gonna be like fire is gonna be strong against my new enemy type, and then it's just like way too strong. Maybe I'll actually take off that resistance for the beefier guys. So if my smaller guys were weak to it, and they're like, oh, we're crushing it, and then they see a similar enemy type, and then they hit it, and they're like, this one does not seem to have the same propensity to damage from fire as the ones that you fought previously. Immediately the encounter I feel becomes more interesting for one,
because they have to rethink strategies.
Right,
is a very fair thing.
But it also kind of works around the introduction of that item by it's still strong, it's still a flame tongue, it's still cool, but it's not just going to like wipe the floor with all of the enemies.
That is a big
that
thing.
I'm kind of sending at them afterwards.
Especially if you perhaps set up something with having like a vulnerability to a certain damage type, and then realize, wow, that's doing double damage is really bad for this thing. This encounter should have lasted at least 3 rounds, and it wasn't before. Like, and then sometimes that happens, you know.
Yeah, sometimes the die don't agree with you.
But the thing is that you can then just perhaps give them something to adjust for that vulnerability. I personally view keep the same weaknesses but increase the damage. And make it harder for them to get, increase their speed, make them harder to touch, while keeping the same mechanics is how I see it, just so the players don't get confused too much. Because sometimes there's a point where, you want that, change of game plan and stuff, but also you don't want the players to just be like, what should we do? One, because we didn't mention it once today, but it has to get mentioned every time. If I make an item too strong, I will straight up talk to my player and be like, yo, can we roll back the damage die on this? Or like, can we change this a little bit to this? I've done that,
I'm definitely not afraid to do that, especially because I'd rather nerf an item than to make it super underwhelming and then have to like incrementally buff it until it like works. And then because like I feel like if you go over, you can always it's a little easy. And then again, this is my personal just like experience, I feel like it's easier to shave off than it is to like build up from something too weak.
That is true. That is true.
Because then you run the risk of
the magic and like
over.
Immersion stuff.
Because if you're trying to fix an underwhelming item, there's a chance you make it go over and then it's busted and then you have to shave off anyway. I'd rather and this is as someone who's made a lot of underwhelming items. Now my approach is kind of the opposite. I'd rather make it too strong and then have one of those middle encounters and then notice that it's too strong, and then I'll just kind of talk to the player and be like, hey, this is a little strong. Can we either increase the cooldown, decrease the number of uses per day, or decrease the damage die?
Exactly. And
that's one easy way to do it.
No, exactly. I remember like what I did. I think this does tap into the previous topic a bit. And also, I guess all the topics in general is that, when I make something from scratch, when I make something that's fully untested, I remember like I made like a subclass, and this can be applied to even an item. We made a subclass that was like, damn, I'm making this thing off my own like ideas and head, and I know that stuff ain't sound. I know for a fact that this stuff may be busted. There's a chance it may be true. The chance that maybe like this thing is just fun and like works nice, and you have to like I did approach the player and be like, hey, so you have a couple of options here. You can either roll with something a bit safer, and have something that's is tested and is a generic item, or if you're willing, we can test out something that's out of that I made, and there is a chance. Full disclaimer that I may nerf this at any point, and I just want to be forth give them the like ahead of time warning. That is extremely beneficial, just to be like by the way, there may be some hot fixes in the future, and hey, maybe there might be some hot fixes in your benefit of increasing the damage sometimes, and you have to be clear. And most times, most players are cool with that, unless your player is like a stickler to like being like, no, you gave this to me, this is what I deserve. Like that. It's fairly rare that happens, and most of the time that happens is a symptom of a larger problem. Really. And and as a DM, you should really feel comfortable with your players, because this is a collaborative effort. Like you are the DM, you do make the items, that the players should have it's beneficial to provide them an amount of input and criticism also. Just asking them, what do you think about this item? Or like I've done that a couple of times where like, what do you think about this? Is this a bit too busted? Is it a bit too thing? And like we can then work on sometimes hot fixes are not necessary when they're just an unspoken rule to not use it this way. Where you're like it doesn't work that way. Sorry.
And I like doing it. I don't know if this is a thing in vanilla D&D, but I like how in one of Kobe's campaigns, There were like levels of
Yes.
attunement.
Vestiges. Yeah, that's the thing
Okay.
that was done by Matthew Mercer.
Okay, gotcha.
And like Wild
Um,
Mounts, yeah.
I like that idea a
It's a
lot
really
because
fun
I
idea.
feel like once you nail the bottom one, it actually makes it really easy for you to scale up the
Yeah.
difficulty of your encounters and then just crank crank the magic item a
That's
little bit.
that's a really good way for scaling. Like
Yeah.
in general, is like having items that level up along with the players is a really good way of making something that at a base is a good item, and depending on how much you feel is necessary to buff the player, you add them stuff that's custom made on each level up to them, or sometimes just throwing an item in general, where like one of the like vestiges of divergence, I think is what they're called,
Right.
and like you throw them at them, and those items have no like particular like requirement as much as at the GM's discretion, it goes up a thing, and there's
Right.
suggested like milestones that you should go with and stuff, and that's you can do that with level ups with certain stuff. I mean, in my case, one of them was after I killed the dragon that destroyed my like hometown, my vestige leveled up,
Right.
and it gives that kind of extra kind of connection
Yeah.
the player has, and gives them that ability to role play with their item that I feel like is highly beneficial. And I do believe that I think I have a couple of them running in my game right now. Except the thing is, I'm not really sure which ones they are. Except I know that for a fact that some of the items and some of the players, should they persist along a certain path, their item is going to improve with them.
You just can't do it with dragons though, because like
Yeah,
scaled.
Yeah,
You're scaling your magic.
That was a
'cause
bad
it's
one. No.
Scaling.
No.
Scaling your magic item by killing a dragon.
Well, actually, I think that could work
Snakes,
out. No,
snakes can't work either.
no, dude, that happened with in Kobe's game where we used like the black dragon scales on my armor, and like it does scale sometimes. It
I
do
don't
be
like,
scaling.
I don't like that pun.
Uh,
You stole it from me.
yeah,
I'm not. No.
fine.
All right. Well, I think we're wrapping. We're
Yeah.
close to wrapping up here. So, yeah, magic items, super super cool. Definitely encourage people to start splashing them into your game if you don't do already. But yeah, I think we're gonna call it for session 8. So
Yeah.
thank you guys for joining us. Anyone
As
in the
always,
chat?
YouTube, we have our VODs uploaded, as well as I'm pretty sure everyone here is from the Discord server, but in case you never know, yeah, our Discord servers should be posted also. We have multiple people typing both those links at the same time.
Yeah.
This is true cooperation.
Yes.
But yes, thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. As always, definitely let us know what you want to hear about, what you want us to talk about. And
Yeah.
other than that, I guess we'll see you on the next one.
See ya,
Thanks for
yeah.
tuning in.
Peace.